So Charles Leclerc finally returned to victory for the first time since 2024 at Silverstone last race. It comes after a few races where he's really struggled with the car and has not scored any points except at Austria. And I just want to talk about why he struggled at the last few races and if the victory at Silverstone is a turnaround or just a kind of a blip and he's still got work to do. So since about Canada, Leclerc has just struggled for pace and execution. In Canada, he was decent in the sprint and kept up with Hamilton, but in the race on the medium stint got completely outclassed and had 30 seconds put on him by his teammate. Now, the explanation after that race was that Hamilton was putting more temperature in the tyres with his driving style and able to keep them warm, whereas Leclerc, with a smoother style, was not putting enough temperature in them and therefore was just sliding around. And that is partly backed up because Leclerc had that half spin in the race to show that he did not have much grip. The next race after that at Monaco is a bit different, where he, in qualifying, had the pace, but just put it in the wall on the final lap when he was pushing quite hard. So we don't know where that lap would have put him, if it would have been on pole or even behind Hamilton. But ultimately, the pace was there. He just overpushed it. Now, in the race, the race pace was very good. He had a solid first stint where he extended and was catching up to Hamilton until the safety car derailed things. And then behind the safety car, he ended up in the barrier because apparently one of his brakes failed or something, or I think 3 of the 4 brakes failed. I think that was the official explanation given. And there was also a bit of broken track he ran over, so he got a bit of dirt on his tyres, but ultimately it was said that it was not his fault. So that's a different type of struggle. That's not a pure pace struggle. That is a struggle with just putting a weekend together and execution, which, you know, drivers can struggle with from time to time, but the pace was there fundamentally. Barcelona was the exact same story. The pace was there, but he failed to put it together. He was there with Hamilton in qualifying all the way through until Q3, when on that first lap he binned it. Now, if you believe what Nico Rosberg said, you would think that he was pushing hard to try and match what Hamilton was doing, particularly in the braking of, I think, turn 3 or 4. But ultimately, the pace was there again, and he would have probably been fighting for pole or P3 with Hamilton if he'd put a lap together. Now, in the race, he paid the consequence of this poor qualifying by starting 10th. He was running an okay race up until he retired with a hydraulic problem at the front. It was a race where he was kind of nowhere near Hamilton, but that's what happens when you start at the back. But ultimately, you need to put it together. But yet again, this is not a weekend where he struggled with pace. He just struggled to put it together. Now, Austria is an interesting one because in qualifying, he did put it together ahead of Hamilton. Now, albeit Hamilton messed up his first lap, so he needed just to put in a safe banker lap on the second one, just so he had a time on the board. But weirdly, Leclerc struggled actually more in the race compared to qualifying, which is the opposite problem he's had. His race pace is very solid. In Austria, it wasn't. He got passed on the outside by Hamilton on the first lap, and then just burnt through his tyres the whole race. He pitted a bit early on the second stint and had to box for softs at the end just to avoid getting a puncture, presumably. So that was the first time where I noticed his race pace was noticeably off and just nowhere compared to Hamilton, really. Now, part of the reason he struggled those last few races in the instance where he had no pace was because he's changed his brake discs to carbon industry ones. This happened following Monaco, where there was a bit of a public falling out between Leclerc and Brembo, even though they've been the brake supplier for 50 years for Ferrari, I think, in the deal. But ultimately, Leclerc moved over to what Hamilton was doing, just to try and feel a bit more comfortable. And actually, that is going to take some adaptation time. So actually, I was expecting him to be more fundamentally off the pace than failing to put things together. And after Austria, I really thought he was in for a tough time this season, because I thought he would just need a lot of time to get used to the, I think, sharper initial bite with the carbon industries. Then in Britain, it was kind of two stories. In practice and in the sprint, he was pretty much nowhere compared to Hamilton. Hamilton led every session on Friday, while Leclerc didn't lead any. And in the sprint, Hamilton fought with Antonelli for the win, while Leclerc was battling with the midfield behind. Then after the sprint, Leclerc said something very interesting. He said he was going to take a philosophical change in his setup to try and find some performance. Now, when I read this, I thought it was going to be a disaster. I thought he was going to do something extreme with the setup and just end up getting even more lost, because what he needed to recover was just a clean weekend without any incidents. So then immediately in qualifying, he was there. In Q1, Q2, Q3, he was there with Hamilton, and his final Q3 lap was about 0.2 faster, or 1.5 tenths faster. So a very good lap. against Hamilton at Silverstone. But he outqualified Hamilton at Austria last week, so this could be the same story over again. But it clearly wasn't, because in the race, he did a very good job. In the first stint, I think he gapped Hamilton by about 10 seconds. Hamilton, of course, having a lot of understeer, and so ultimately, I think if Hamilton didn't have that understeer, he would have probably fought with Leclerc. And he obviously got fortunate then with Antonelli retiring from the race, but ultimately the pace was there to at least compete for the win with Antonelli, whereas the last few races it wasn't. And he said that this setup change that he did can be replicated for most tracks, so this should really be progress that you see at Spa and beyond. But in my personal opinion, the big test for Leclerc is going to come at Hungary, which is going to be a track with a lot of heavy braking zones. I think this is going to be the test to see if he's managed to adapt to these carbon industry brake discs or not. Spa is going to be more about high-speed cornering, and we know Leclerc is very strong there and is probably going to be right there or ahead of Hamilton. But Hungary is not only going to be a big test for Leclerc with the brake discs, but it's also objectively probably Hamilton's strongest track. So it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to be there with Hamilton or half a second off. And ultimately at Hungary, I think if he's there with Hamilton, he's going to be very dangerous for the rest of the season for Hamilton and obviously the Mercedes drivers. I think it's a little too late for him to be competing for the title just because of the barren run he's had for the last 4 races, but I think it would be a great way to put some confidence together for next season, where hopefully Ferrari will have a car that can fight from the start. So to answer the question, is Charles Leclerc back? I think we are going to find out in 2 races time if he's back. Thank you for watching, and subscribe if you enjoyed.